It was a quiet Saturday afternoon in the city. The sun was shining softly and the air had that mix of warmth and cool breeze that made people want to be outside. Families filled the park nearby, couples walked hand in hand, and others wandered through the local shopping center, looking for deals or just passing time. Among them was a woman in her mid-30s dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her steps calm and unhurried as she walked into a large department store. She wasn't in a rush. Her day off had finally come after a long, stressful week at work, and she just wanted to relax. She moved through the aisles slowly, looking at a few household items and trying on a light jacket. She greeted a store clerk politely, smiled at a young mother passing by, and continued shopping peacefully. She didn't draw attention to herself. She looked like any other customer, but sometimes how you look is all it takes for someone to make up their mind about you. A few aisles away, two security guards watched her on the camera feed. They whispered to each other, noticing how she placed her purse in the cart and occasionally pulled out her phone. To them, every move seemed suspicious. One of them said quietly, "She's been walking around too long without buying anything. Let's keep an eye on her." The other nodded, already convinced something wasn't right. The woman continued shopping, unaware that she was now the center of unwanted attention. She stopped by the beauty section, picked up a bottle of lotion, and compared prices. She even joked lightly with another shopper about how expensive everything was becoming. After a few minutes, she decided on what she needed and headed to the checkout counter. That's when things began to change. Just as she reached the register, the two guards appeared behind her. One of them cleared his throat and said firmly, "Ma'am, can we speak with you for a moment?" She turned, surprised but polite. "Sure," she said, a bit puzzled. "Is there a problem?" "We just need to check your bag," one of them replied. "There have been reports of missing items and we noticed you placing things into your purse." Her face showed confusion. She looked down at her bag and then back at them. "My personal things are in there. I haven't taken anything from the store." She spoke calmly, trying not to cause a scene, but the people around her were already starting to stare. One guard crossed his arms. "Then you won't mind if we take a look?" She felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. Dozens of eyes were now on her and whispers started spreading. She could see a few people pulling out their phones, recording. She didn't want to make things worse. She gently placed her bag on the counter. "Go ahead," she said quietly. The guard opened the bag, sifting through her wallet, phone, and a few personal items. Nothing was stolen, no tags, no hidden merchandise. Everything was normal. He looked at his partner, a bit unsure now. But instead of apologizing, he said, "We'll need you to come with us to the office just to clear things up." The woman's patience started to wear thin. "You saw there's nothing in my bag," she said. "I haven't done anything wrong. Why do I need to go anywhere?" Her tone was still controlled but firm. The second guard spoke up, his voice louder than necessary. "Ma'am, if you refuse, we'll have to call the police." The crowd around them grew larger. Some people muttered in disbelief. Others just watched with curiosity. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking what was happening. The woman took a deep breath. She didn't want trouble, didn't want to argue in front of everyone. She nodded slowly. "Fine, let's go." They led her toward a small office near the back of the store. Her heart pounded with frustration. She had faced uncomfortable moments before, but this was different. She felt humiliated, judged for something she hadn't done. Still, she stayed calm, because she knew reacting angrily would only make things worse. In the small office, they asked her to sit. One guard started filling out a form while the other called the local police. She could hear him say, "Yes, we have a possible shoplifter detained." Those words made her clench her fists under the table. She couldn't believe it had gone this far. She spoke softly. "You know, you could have just checked the cameras. You would have seen that I didn't take anything." The guard avoided her eyes. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job," he replied. "Doing your job means being fair," she said, not assuming the worst because of how someone looks. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from disappointment. A few minutes later, two police officers walked in. The guards explained what they thought had happened. The officers nodded and turned to the woman. "Ma'am, we just need to ask you a few questions," one said. She explained everything clearly, that she had picked up some items, decided what to buy, and never took anything without paying. She even offered to show her receipts and bank app as proof. But by that time, the officers seemed more focused on procedure than truth. We'll still need to verify this with store management, one said. Please stand up. The woman looked at him, her calm expression slowly fading. You're not serious, she said quietly. Just standard process, the officer replied, reaching for his handcuffs. The sound of the cuffs clicking around her wrists was sharp, cutting through the silence of the small room. She stared at the table, her eyes steady, her jaw tight. She didn't resist. Outside, more people had gathered near the entrance as the officers led her out of the store. Phones were raised high, recording every second. She could hear snippets of conversation. What did she do? I think she was stealing. No, she didn't look like it. She kept her head held high. The walk from the store to the patrol car felt endless. Every step echoed with shame she didn't deserve. One of the officers opened the car door, guiding her inside. She sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window at the crowd that had gathered. Some people looked angry for her. Others just looked entertained. As the car pulled away, the officer in the passenger seat glanced at her reflection in the mirror. You know, this could have been easier if you had just cooperated earlier. She turned her head slowly toward him, her voice calm but firm. I did cooperate. You just didn't listen. The officer didn't reply. He looked away, pretending to focus on the road. She leaned back against the seat, feeling the cool air from the car vent brush against her skin. She wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly she was disappointed. She thought about the irony of the situation, how the very people who were supposed to protect her had treated her like a criminal without proof. She had spent her career working with people like them, trusting the badge, believing in the system. But at that moment, sitting in the back of that car with her wrists bound, she wondered how many others had sat there before her, feeling the same mix of confusion, hurt, and disbelief. The drive to the police station felt longer than it was. The streets blurred past, the same city she had served now looking unfamiliar. She thought of her family, her friends, and what they would think if they saw her like this. She wanted to speak, to explain, but she stayed quiet. She knew there would be a time to talk, but not now. When they arrived at the station, one officer opened her door. Step out, please, he said. She did, her movements calm and steady. They led her inside, past desks and other officers. Some looked up, curious. No one recognized her, not yet. They placed her in a small room, told her to wait. She sat down, resting her cupped hands on the table. The room was cold, the air heavy with silence. She could hear muffled voices outside. Her thoughts drifted to her badge, still in her purse, sitting just a few feet away from where she sat. She took a slow breath, closing her eyes. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. The truth had a way of coming out. And when it did, it would shake everyone in that building. For now, she waited, quietly, patiently, with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who knows the power of the truth. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. The woman sat still, her hands resting on the table, the metal cuffs leaving faint marks on her wrists. The white walls around her felt cold, almost too bright under the flickering light. She stared at the door, waiting for someone to come in and explain what was happening. The irony of it all wasn't lost on her. She had spent countless hours in rooms like this, questioning people, taking notes, searching for truth. But today, she was the one being questioned. After what felt like forever, the door opened. One of the officers who had arrested her stepped in, holding a clipboard. His expression was firm, but there was a hint of unease in his eyes. He sat across from her, shuffling through papers before looking up. All right, he began. We just need to clear a few things up. You were detained for possible theft. The store staff claims you concealed merchandise in your bag. Do you have anything you want to say before we move forward? She looked at him for a moment before speaking, her voice calm and steady. I already told the guards I didn't steal anything. I paid for what I picked. You can check the cameras if you want. Everything I did was in plain sight. The officer scribbled something down on his form. We'll get to that, he said. But for now, we need to follow procedure. He avoided her eyes, and she noticed the slight tremble in his hand as he wrote. Maybe he wasn't sure of her guilt either, but protocol was easier to follow than admitting a mistake. She stayed quiet, knowing arguing wouldn't help right now. Minutes passed before another officer entered, holding a small plastic bag filled with her belongings, her wallet, phone, and keys. He placed it on the table. We'll go through this, he said, his tone neutral. Standard check. She watched as he opened her wallet, pulling out cards, receipts, and finally, a small badge holder. He didn't notice it right away. He was focused on the receipts, flipping through them quickly. But when his fingers brushed the edge of the badge, he froze. The first officer looked up, confused. "What is it?" The second one turned the holder around. The metallic shine of the police badge caught the light. The room fell silent. The first officer's pen dropped from his hand. The woman leaned back slightly, her eyes calm. "That's mine," she said softly. "You can read the name on it." The first officer picked up the badge, his mouth opening slightly as he read. His face went pale. You're on the force?" She nodded. "Detective. Off duty today." For a moment no one spoke. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the weight of realization sinking in. The officers looked at each other, unsure what to say. The second officer cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" She gave a small, tired smile. "I wanted to see how far you'd go before checking the facts." The first officer rubbed his forehead, clearly embarrassed. This is a misunderstanding. We'll sort it out right away." She watched them scramble, making phone calls and whispering outside the door. She could hear parts of their conversation. Words like mistake, internal affairs, release her. She didn't feel satisfaction, just a quiet disappointment that she had predicted exactly how things would go. When they came back in, one of them had already removed his hat, a small sign of respect. "We're very sorry for the confusion," he said, fumbling with the keys to unlock her cuffs. "You're free to go, detective. It was just a misunderstanding." She rubbed her wrists gently once the cuffs were off. "It wasn't just a misunderstanding," she said quietly. "You didn't even check the footage before arresting me." The officer hesitated. "We were following the report from the store. We had to respond quickly." She looked straight at him. Responding quickly doesn't mean acting blindly. Her tone wasn't angry, but it carried weight. "You could have ruined someone's life today. What if I wasn't who I am? Would you have cared then?" He had no answer. His silence spoke louder than words. She stood up, picking up her things from the table. The badge gleamed faintly in her hand, a painful reminder of what that symbol was supposed to mean. She had always believed in fairness and giving people the benefit of the doubt, but now she had felt what it was like to be judged first and heard later. Before leaving the room, she turned back to the officers. "Do better next time," she said simply. Then she walked out. Outside, the sunlight hit her face. The brightness felt almost blinding after hours inside that building. She took a deep breath, trying to let go of the tension in her chest. But as she stepped toward the parking lot, she saw the small crowd still standing near the entrance, waiting, whispering. Someone recognized her from earlier and pointed. "That's her," they said. "The woman they arrested." The whispers grew louder, but now they carried a different tone, curiosity mixed with guilt. A few of them had seen the videos already spreading online, showing the moment she was taken away. Someone muttered, "She didn't even do anything. She didn't respond." She just kept walking toward her car. A few reporters had started to show up, microphones in hand, hoping to get a comment. One of them called out, "Ma'am, is it true you're a police officer?" "What happened inside?" She paused for a moment, looking at the crowd. "It's true," she said calmly. "And what happened inside is exactly why we need to change how we see people." Then she opened her car door and drove off, leaving the murmurs behind. As she drove through the city streets, her phone buzzed nonstop, calls from her precinct, texts from colleagues who had already heard. She ignored them for now. She needed a moment to breathe, to think. At a red light, she glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes looked tired but strong. She thought about how easily things could have gone worse. If she had spoken louder, argued more, or resisted even slightly, the outcome might have been different. The thought made her stomach twist. When she reached home, she placed her purse on the table and sat on the couch in silence. The TV was on in the background, showing a news report about rising community tensions and police relations. She watched without really listening. The irony was too much. Her phone rang again. This time she answered. It was her captain. "I just saw the report," his voice said, serious but controlled. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she replied quietly. "Just disappointed," he sighed. "We're going to handle this. The department's already calling for an internal review. You don't have to speak to the press if you don't want to." She hesitated. "I think I should," she said. People need to hear what really happened, not from gossip, but from me." There was a pause on the other end. "If that's what you want. Just be careful. Things like this can get political fast, I know," she said. "But this isn't about politics. It's about truth." That night, as she prepared for bed, her mind wouldn't rest. The images replayed again and again, the guards, the cuffs, the disbelief on the officers' faces. But through the frustration, she also felt something else growing inside her. Purpose. She realized that what had happened wasn't just her story. It was something that happened to others all the time. People who didn't have a badge or a title or a way to prove their worth in a split second. She thought about all the faces she'd seen in her years on the force, those who were accused, dismissed, or misunderstood. The next morning, she woke up early. The sun was just rising, painting the sky with soft orange and gold. She made a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the light creep over the city. Her badge sat on the table beside her, its shine catching the light. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. For the first time, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like responsibility. She opened her notebook and began writing, a detailed account of everything that had happened, from the moment she walked into the store to the second they unlocked her cuffs. Not out of anger, but out of duty. She wanted it documented, not for revenge, but for change. When she finished, she closed the notebook and looked out the window again. The city was waking up. Cars moved slowly down the streets, people hurried to work, life continued. But for her, everything felt a little different now. She knew this was just the beginning. What had started as a normal day of shopping had become something much bigger, and she wasn't going to let it end as just another story of misunderstanding. She was going to turn it into something that mattered. She leaned back in her chair, took a slow sip of her coffee, and whispered to herself, "If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone, and that's exactly why it has to change." The news spread faster than she expected. By the next morning, her phone was filled with messages and missed calls. Some were from colleagues, others from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had seen the video, the one showing her being led out of the store in handcuffs. It was on social media, shared thousands of times with people arguing in the comments. Some were outraged, others skeptical, but no one could deny what they saw. An off-duty police officer arrested for shoplifting, only for the truth to come out later. She turned off her phone for a while, needing a moment of quiet. Sitting at her kitchen table, she stared at her badge again, the same badge that had opened doors, earned her respect, and sometimes even fear from others, yet it hadn't protected her when it mattered most. She thought about what it represented: justice, service, honor. Those words echoed in her mind, now carrying a different weight. Later that day, she was called to the precinct for a meeting. As she walked through the familiar doors, she could feel the shift in atmosphere. Some officers greeted her with sympathy, while others avoided eye contact. Whispers followed her down the hallway. She had been on the force long enough to know what that meant. Some believed her, others didn't. Her captain was waiting for her in his office. He gestured for her to sit, his expression calm but serious. "I know this has been a rough few days," he began, "but we need to talk about what happens next." She nodded quietly, bracing herself. "There's an investigation underway," he continued. "The department wants to understand what happened both at the store and here afterward. Internal Affairs is reviewing the arrest, and the city's public relations team wants a statement from you. The press is already asking for interviews." She took a deep breath. "I'm not sure what to say that hasn't already been seen," she replied. "The video speaks for itself." He leaned forward. "Maybe, but the way you handle this matters. You're not just another officer. You represent the department. The wrong words could make things worse." She looked at him carefully. "You mean worse for me or worse for the department?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Both," she didn't argue. She just nodded slowly. "I understand." After the meeting, she went home feeling heavier than before. She had joined the police to make a difference, to help people, to stand for fairness. But now it felt like she was standing on the other side of the line, seeing what others had always complained about. The system she worked for had failed her, not because of procedure, but because of perception. That evening, she finally agreed to a short interview with a local news channel. They met at a quiet cafe away from the noise. The reporter, a young woman with kind eyes, began gently. You've been through a lot this week.
Can you tell us what was going through your mind during that arrest?
She paused before answering. Honestly, I was shocked, she said softly. Not just because I was being accused of something I didn't do, but because I saw how quickly people jumped to conclusions. I was calm, polite, cooperative, but none of that mattered. All they saw was what they wanted to see. The reporter nodded, letting her continue. I've spent years trying to build trust between law enforcement and the community, she said. But that day I wasn't an officer in their eyes. I was just another suspect. It made me realize how deep the problem really is. The interview aired that night. Her words struck a chord with many viewers. People began sharing the clip online, praising her for her composure and honesty. Others reached out thanking her for speaking up. But not everyone reacted kindly. Some comments accused her of using her position for sympathy. Others questioned her story entirely. She tried not to read too much, but the negativity still stung. A few days later, she was invited to speak at a community meeting organized by a local group that focused on fairness and equality. At first, she wasn't sure if she should go. She wasn't looking to become a symbol or a spokesperson, but something inside her told her it was the right thing to do. When she arrived, the small auditorium was packed. People from all backgrounds filled the seats, young and old, officers and civilians, all waiting to hear her speak. As she walked onto the stage, the room went silent. She looked around and took a deep breath. I never expected to be here, she began, her voice calm but firm. I didn't plan for any of this. I just went shopping on my day off. But what happened to me opened my eyes in a way I can't ignore anymore. She paused, scanning the room. When those guards stopped me, I thought it was a mistake. When the officers handcuffed me, I told myself they'd realize it soon. But they didn't. They didn't stop to question if what they were told made sense. They saw a woman they didn't know and made a choice based on that. It wasn't about theft. It was about assumption. A quiet murmur rippled through the audience. I'm not angry, she continued. I'm disappointed, because I know those officers weren't bad people. I've worked with people like them my whole career. But good people can still make bad choices when they don't stop to think. Bias doesn't always come from hate, it comes from habit. And habits can be changed. The room was completely silent now. Every word she said came from the heart, not from a script. She wasn't trying to accuse anyone. She wanted understanding. I'm still proud to wear my badge, she said softly, but now I wear it differently. It reminds me that even when we think we know what justice looks like, we can still be wrong. We have to do better, not just for people like me, but for everyone who doesn't get the chance to explain themselves. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some even had tears in their eyes. She smiled humbly, not out of pride, but relief. For the first time since that day, she felt like something good might come from all of it. After the event, several young officers approached her. One of them said, "Ma'am, I just want you to know, you made me think. I didn't realize how easy it is to judge without meaning to." Another added quietly, "I'm sorry for what you went through. It shouldn't have happened." She thanked them both. "What matters is what you do next," she said. "Learn from it. Question things. Be fair." That night she walked out of the building feeling lighter. The city lights shimmered around her, and for a moment, she just stood there, breathing in the cool air. She knew this wasn't the end of her journey. It was the beginning of something new. People were talking, thinking, reflecting, and that was how real change started. Over the next few weeks, she received invitations from police departments across the state to speak about her experience. She hesitated at first, worried it would seem like she was exploiting what happened, but she realized that staying silent would help no one. So she agreed. Each time she spoke, she shared her story with honesty and humility, reminding others that fairness starts with awareness. At one session, after she finished speaking, an older officer approached her. His voice trembled as he said, "I've been in this job for 30 years. I thought I'd seen it all. But hearing you talk made me realize I still have blind spots. Thank you for reminding me why I joined in the first place," she smiled gently. "That means more than you think," she said. Slowly she began to see change. Her department introduced new training programs focusing on empathy and communication. Officers were encouraged to slow down, to ask questions before assuming guilt. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was a start. One evening, as she sat in her car outside the station watching the sunset, she thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the anger, the fear, but also the strength that followed. She realized that sometimes life tests people in ways they don't expect, not to break them, but to show them who they really are. She smiled softly to herself and whispered, "Maybe this was meant to happen." Her phone buzzed again, another message. This time from a young woman she had met at the community meeting. The message read, "Thank you. Your story made me feel seen. It made me believe that good people inside the system can still make a difference." Reading those words, she felt something inside her settle. The pain of that day would never fully disappear, but it had turned into purpose. And that, she knew, was something worth holding on to. She started her car, ready to head home as the last light of the sun faded behind the skyline. The world outside looked the same, but to her, everything had changed. The news of the arrest spread through the station faster than anyone expected. By the time the woman sat in a small, quiet office, everyone in the building already knew what had happened. The air felt heavy with confusion and shame. Officers walked past the door, whispering and glancing in. Nobody knew what to say. The booking officer, who had found the badge, sat across from her, his face pale and eyes downcast. He kept fidgeting with a pen, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. She sat still, her hands resting on the table. Her expression was calm, but inside she was exhausted. The whole situation had left her feeling both angry and sad. She had worked in law enforcement for years, had seen difficult days, but nothing like this. Being treated like a suspect, accused without reason and humiliated in public by people who were supposed to be her colleagues. It cut deep. After several minutes, the police chief entered the room. He looked older than his years, shoulders tense. He sighed and sat down, glancing at her badge on the table before speaking. "I don't even know where to start," he said quietly. "This should never have happened." "But it did," she replied softly. "And not just to me. It happens every day to people who don't have a badge to prove who they are." The chief rubbed his forehead. "You're right. We failed here completely." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "An internal investigation has already started. The officers involved have been placed on leave until further notice. We're also reviewing store footage and statements. I want you to know we're going to handle this the right way." She nodded but didn't speak. She had heard similar promises before, after other incidents, other mistakes. But this time it wasn't just a story in the news. It had happened to her. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. A young officer entered and handed the chief a tablet. On the screen was a video that had already started circulating online, a clip of the arrest filmed by a bystander. The video showed her calmly trying to explain while the officers handcuffed her. The caption read, "Another black woman wrongfully arrested." The chief looked pained as he watched. "This is already out there," he said, turning the screen toward her. "People are talking about it. Reporters are calling. It's a lot." She looked at the video and then back at him. "Good," she said. "Maybe this time people will actually listen." That night, the video spread across social media. Thousands of comments flooded in. Some people were outraged, others heartbroken. Many shared their own experiences of being treated unfairly. News channels picked up the story, and soon it was on national television. The public demanded accountability. At home, she sat on her couch watching the coverage. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends, coworkers, and strangers offering support. But she also received a few hateful messages from people who didn't believe her or thought she had exaggerated. She turned her phone face down and sighed. She wasn't looking for fame or sympathy. She just wanted fairness, not only for herself but for everyone who faced the same kind of unfair treatment. A few days later, she met with the department's internal affairs unit. They asked detailed questions about what had happened, how the store employees had behaved, and how the responding officers handled the call. She answered everything honestly, even though it wasn't easy. Each question brought back flashes of that humiliating moment in the store, the stares, the whispers, the disbelief. After the interview, she walked outside and took a deep breath. The air felt cold and sharp. A small group of reporters stood near the building. They called out questions, cameras flashing, but she didn't stop. She wasn't ready to talk yet, not until she had processed what had happened. Later that week, the police department held a press conference. The chief stood at the podium with several senior officers beside him. The cameras rolled as he acknowledged the mistake publicly. "We failed one of our own," he said, "and in doing so, we failed the community we serve." There is no excuse for what happened. We are implementing immediate changes, including new training focused on bias awareness and accountability. The woman watched the broadcast from her home. His words were good, but she knew change wouldn't come overnight. She had seen too much to believe that one press conference could fix everything. Still, she hoped it was a start. Over the next few weeks, life slowly began to settle, but nothing felt normal. When she returned to the precinct, many officers avoided her eyes. Some came up quietly to apologize. Others said nothing at all, unsure of what to say. She could feel the tension in every hallway she walked through, but she also noticed small signs of change. The department had begun hosting workshops about racial bias, communication, and empathy. Officers who once brushed off those topics now sat and listened. She was invited to speak at one of the sessions. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could relive the experience in front of everyone, but she knew it mattered. So one afternoon, she stood in front of a room full of officers, some she knew, some she didn't, and began to speak. "When I put on this uniform, I believe in what it stands for," she said. "But that day when I wasn't wearing it, I saw how quickly judgment replaces understanding. I saw what it's like to be on the other side, and it broke something inside me." The room was silent. No one shifted or whispered. She could see the weight of her words landing on their faces. "This isn't about blame," she continued. "It's about awareness. It's about remembering that every person you meet deserves respect, uniform or not. Because the way we treat people when we think no one is watching says more about us than any badge ever could." When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a long moment before people began to clap. A few officers even came up to thank her personally. It wasn't easy, but she felt a small bit of healing start to take place. Meanwhile, the store where it all happened faced its own backlash. The management released a statement apologizing for the incident, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But customers weren't satisfied. Many stopped shopping there. Activists organized community meetings to talk about racial profiling in local businesses. What had started as one woman's painful experience was now turning into a larger conversation about justice, bias, and equality. Despite all the attention, she kept a low profile. She continued her work quietly, staying focused on her duties. But one evening, she received an email from a young woman who had seen her story online. The message was short but powerful. "Thank you for speaking up. What happened to you helped me find the courage to report what happened to me too." She read that line several times, feeling tears well up in her eyes. It reminded her that even painful experiences could bring light to others. In the following month, she noticed a change in the department's atmosphere. Officers began talking more openly about issues they once ignored. The department introduced new policies requiring more accountability during stops and arrests. The change was slow, but it was happening. One afternoon, while on duty, she stood outside the same department store where it had all begun. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the parking lot. She looked at the entrance, remembering how she had been dragged out in handcuffs months ago. The memory still hurt, but she no longer felt powerless. She had turned that pain into purpose. A young girl walked by with her mother, smiling and waving at her. The woman smiled back. In that small moment, she felt something shift inside, a quiet reminder that progress, no matter how slow, was still progress. As she got back into her car, she glanced at her badge resting on the seat beside her. It gleamed softly in the fading light. She reached over and picked it up, holding it for a moment. The badge still meant something to her. Not just authority, but responsibility. The responsibility to make things better, to build trust, and to ensure what happened to her would never happen again. She took a deep breath and started the engine. There was still a long road ahead, but she was ready to keep going. Her story had become more than a headline. It had become a message, one that would remind everyone that real change begins with understanding, and understanding begins with seeing each other as human first. Months had passed since that day, but the memory still followed her like a faint shadow. Sometimes it came back when she walked through the station, or when she heard the sound of handcuffs clicking shut, but it no longer hurt the same way. Time had softened the edges, and what once felt like a wound had slowly turned into a lesson she carried with quiet strength. The city had changed too. People still talked about what happened, not with anger now, but with awareness. The story had started conversations in schools, workplaces, and community halls. Police departments in nearby towns invited her to speak about what she had gone through. Each time she stood in front of the crowd with steady eyes, not to relive her pain but to help others understand what needed to change. One morning, she was invited to a large conference in another state where officers, teachers, and social workers had gathered to talk about justice and empathy. As she stood backstage waiting for her turn, she looked out at the crowd. Hundreds of people filled the seats. Some looked curious, some emotional, but all of them seemed ready to listen. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. Her voice was calm as she began to speak. She told them about that day at the store, how a simple shopping trip had turned into one of the hardest moments of her life. She spoke about the fear, the humiliation, and the disbelief of being accused when she had done nothing wrong. But more importantly, she spoke about what it taught her. "I learned that bias doesn't wear a uniform," she said. "It lives quietly inside people, in their assumptions, in their fears, in the things they don't even realize they believe. The only way to fight it is to face it, to look at it honestly and decide we can do better." The room stayed silent, every eye on her. She could feel their attention not as pressure but as connection. When she finished, the applause was long and warm. People came up to her afterward, thanking her for her courage, some with tears in their eyes. One older woman, a retired teacher, said softly, "You gave me hope again." That was all she needed to hear as she left the stage. A journalist approached and asked if she ever thought about leaving the police force after what happened. She smiled slightly and said, "I thought about it. But if everyone who cares walks away, who will stay to make things better?" Back home, life had settled into a new rhythm. She still worked in the same department, but her role had shifted slightly. She now helped with training programs for new recruits, focusing on empathy, communication, and bias awareness. It was work that mattered to her. Each time she spoke to a group of new officers, she saw in their faces the same mix of pride and uncertainty she had once felt. She reminded them that every badge came with responsibility, not just to enforce the law, but to treat people with respect and fairness, no matter who they were. One day after training, she was walking to her car when she saw a group of teenagers talking loudly near the station. One of them noticed her and waved shyly. She recognized the girl. It was the same one who had sent her an email months ago thanking her for her courage. They spoke briefly, and the girl said she wanted to become an officer someday. The woman smiled and said, "Then be the kind of officer who listens first. The world needs more of those." Moments like that reminded her that what she had gone through had meaning. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt unseen or unheard. Her experience had opened a door for others to step forward, to tell their own stories and to demand fairness. Not everything had been easy, though. There were still people who doubted her, who said she made too much of the incident, who thought she should have stayed quiet. But she had learned not to let those voices drown out the truth. She had seen too much good come from her speaking up. Change was slow, yes, but it was real. A few months later, she was invited to appear on a televised panel about justice reform. Sitting under the bright studio lights, she spoke not as a victim, but as someone who had learned the power of staying calm in the face of unfairness. "Accountability doesn't mean shame," she said. "It means growth. We can't fix what we won't face, and we can't face what we refuse to see." After the broadcast, messages poured in from across the country. Some were from officers who said her story made them reflect on how they approached their jobs. Others were from people who had once been afraid to speak up but now felt stronger. Each message reminded her that her pain had become a ripple of purpose,